Let's jump to the big news story. It really breaks my heart. The National Review reports the Times corrects the record on Officer Sicknick's death, sort of. The gist of the story, the officer who lost his life, it was an unrelated stroke. They say a few days ago, the New York Times quietly updated its report, published over a month earlier, asserting that Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick had been killed by being struck with a fire extinguisher during the January 6th riot. According to the update, quote, new information has emerged regarding the death of the Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick that questions the initial cause of his death provided by officials close to the Capitol Police. They say, as I detailed in a column last week, what the Times calls new information actually began emerging the same day the paper filed its January 8th report. More importantly, they initially said law enforcement sources. Now they're saying officials close to the Capitol Police. What is that? Muriel Bowser, the D.C. mayor? Could it be like a homeless guy who's next to the police department? That's one thing I always pointed out when they say close to. What does that even mean? Well, they say official, I suppose. So at least it's somebody who's working. They say that report was and still is entitled Capitol Police Officer Dies from Injuries in Pro-Trump Rampage. It was not the only such Times report from that day. There was another entitled, quote, he dreamed of being a police officer, then was killed by a pro-Trump mob, in which the Times asserted on Wednesday, pro-Trump supporters attacked the citadel of democracy, overpowered Mr. Sicknick, 42, and struck him in the head with a fire extinguisher, according to two law enforcement officials. With a bloody gash in his head, Mr. Sicknick was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support. He died on Thursday evening. But they mention KHOU he reported he had died from a stroke. The story made no mention of the officer being struck by a fire extinguisher. It did claim, however, that the stroke occurred at the Capitol during the riots, and a caption under the officer's photograph stated that he died of injuries sustained during the riot at the Capitol. Isn't it amazing how they do that? Check this out. We have the actual article from KHOU 11. U.S. Capitol Police Officer on life support dies after suffering stroke following riots, Union Chair said. This is from January 8th. How I mean, I got to be honest. How did I miss this? I mean, this story's old. Yet this was one of the big aspects of the whole impeachment process. The officer who lost his life, they did this big event where they brought him into the Capitol building to lay him to rest. Should we be surprised by this?
No, not at all. I mean, the New York Times went into detail. They talked about a bloody head, blunt force trauma, critical in condition, rushed to the hospital, and now we're finding out all of that. What was that based on? Absolutely nothing. Where's the responsibility? Where's the accountability? YouTube, should Facebook, Twitter, go after these people for knowingly spreading fake news. If you're going to apply this against, the average Joe, your independent media, apply it to them. Whenever there's anonymous sources, I always say there's always reason to be skeptical, and they use anonymous sources. There was videos showing a fire extinguisher flying around, but imagine being a reporter at the New York Times, right? And then just totally fabricating this story. I mean, they're talking about their two sources. Who are their sources? There should be revealed.
They should burn them, right?
Yeah.
Like their sources lied to them.
Yeah.
So either they're okay with that being lied to about what's effectively blood libel, right? You're accusing a political movement of murder falsely.
I have some break. Oh, go ahead, Luke.
Or they did what the mainstream media usually does, and they fabricate and make up sources that are not there at all. So they do this a lot in the mainstream media. So go ahead.
I have breaking news. It is now confirmed to me from a source close to Nancy Pelosi's office in San Francisco that she is in fact a fascist who is, selling us out to massive corporations, and she is personally taking bribes from others close to her office. Now, this source close to her office is a homeless guy in the alley, behind her building. And he seems to be a bit out of it. I think he's not getting his proper medication. You see the point I'm trying to make?
Yeah.
Clever word. Obviously, I don't have any confirmation on Nancy Pelosi being corrupt or whatever. Well, actually, I mean, just read the news and you might come to that conclusion. The point I'm making is this kind of stuff happens all the time. And the New York Times lies all the time. And it's funny that the story came out a month and a half ago, and the New York Times is only just now updating it.
And it's not even admitting fault. It's just saying, well, there's other sources saying something different. Like, you would think that you'd be able to confirm or deny the story about him being the victim of blunt force trauma. That's either true or it's not. And a month after his death, we would know the answer to that question.
The crazy thing is that, I got to be honest, I think a lot of us missed this. I particularly missed it. And it's because we don't read local news. Local news is hurting really bad. Their ad rates are drying up, and people are sending their money to the New York Times So it really is true that we need good journalists to help us understand what's going on right now. Well, just going on in general. And because local news is suffering, more and more people want the national story. More and more people are attracted to the orange man bad narrative. They ignore what's happening around them. Then you have these smaller outlets who actually reach out to the union, find out what really happened. And how is it that we've now gone into an impeachment a month later with this narrative? Like when they laid Officer Sicknick to rest in the Capitol, it was well after it was reported he just died from a stroke.
Mm-hmm.
So remember when this first happened and we were talking about it and somebody in the chat was like, he's actually not dead yet. We're like, he has already died.
That's
right.
right.
That was what was first reported, was that he was gone, like as soon as this happened. And that right from the get-go, it was inconsistent what they were talking about, whether he was actually gone or not. And they couldn't make up their minds.
He was on life support.
Yeah.
I mean, this is supposed to be the paper of record. If the journalist isn't willing to burn their anonymous sources, the journalist should be fired. Like, I mean, you're trying to, I don't know. I mean, it's we shouldn't be surprised that the New York Times is Media Matters, but like it still is, is actually kind of infuriating that they can't even maintain the pretense.
And another thing we have to understand here, this was a very important emotional talking point. We saw a lot of mainstream media figures and also politicians talk about the officer that was beat with a fire extinguisher over its head until he was dead. Beat bloody with a fire extinguisher over and over. Psychological kind of operation, some people would say, to push the bigger point that look how horrible, how evil these people are, when in reality they were caught with their pants down. They were lying about this from the very beginning. And if they're lying about this, what else are they lying about? That's the bigger question Americans should be asking themselves, but they're not. They shouldn't be trusted. And again, I point to, again, the big social tech media companies. They want to combat fight fake news. Fight it right now. Prove them. Give us an example of the mainstream media actually getting a taste of their own medicine.
This is why it's so important that Parler is coming back, because Twitter suppresses news. These big tech giants suppress news. I mean, Twitter literally shut down the Hunter Biden story, and then they take down Parler with more fake news. So the big claim when Parler got taken down was basically that people were organizing on Parler for the Capitol riot, and that was a lie. So all of this information coming out is a lie.
Yeah, I mean, the good example there was Facebook was far more of the center of that sort of organizing for January 6th. Something like, if you actually look at the criminal indictments, like 80% of them mention organizing on Facebook.
There was plans online to go after the Capitol.
Right.
There's groups, there was individuals publicly talking about this, and then the intelligence agencies, we had no idea, we had no clue. And then when it comes to the inauguration, huge, massive security theater, huge National Guard on the church, because there is now there is a legitimate threat.
Look, you got to give them some credit. They may have dropped the ball this time, but I mean, they've been particularly diligent in doing their jobs. Like when the noose was found at the NASCAR garage, they were there.
They were on it.
And they were, yes, absolutely. How many were? Like over a dozen.
Yeah,
a dozen FBI
so
agents.
when we need them most, they're there. I mean, who really cared about the Capitol, right? I mean, we didn't need them.
Well, there's other reports that I'm seeing that Trump actually requested troops on that day, and he was denied. I still haven't been able to independently verify that.
No, it's true.
Okay.
Yeah. So Mayor Muriel Bowser said she didn't want a massive police presence. When they said they were going to bring in the National Guard, she said she didn't want them to be armed. There were other individuals in DC politics saying like, oh no, and it may be that because of Black Lives Matter and the optics around the police coming in, going after the protesters.
But they were guarding the White House, pretty diligently. I mean, there was fences around the White House weeks before January 6th. So, something, of course, a lot of people are asking a lot of questions, especially with some of the people that are arrested that had ties to the FBI. Now, I don't want to get all conspiratorial because, again, we have no actual proof or evidence of this. You have a lot of conjecture. You have a lot of people, connecting the dots on certain issues. But I think it's fair to say that there definitely should be a lot more questions about this event.
I think it's pretty demoralizing, man. I use the New York Times all the time, and I generally give them the benefit of the doubt that when they're reporting something, it's likely to be true. Not massively likely. I'm not saying 99%, but at least, come on, 51%?
There's just like a banal awfulness for our institutions right now. I mean, Arendt said something about the banality of evil. I wouldn't call them evil, but they're just awful. They're like not
the banality of
awfulness. The banality of awfulness. They're just so bad at performing their basic function.
I mean, they've been bad though. I wanna sit here and play this whole like Barry Weiss angle You know, for those unfamiliar, she worked for the Times. She wrote this big letter when she left saying it's like wokeness and critical theory and intolerance taking over. But the reality is the New York Times has been awful for a long time. I mean, the Iraq War,
Yep.
you know,
It's just,
weapons of mass
it's gotten
destruction.
worse. I mean, I think the example would be like they broke the Hillary Clinton email story 4 years ago.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
they published the Snowden articles when they came out during the Obama administration. There was, I think there's two dynamics. One is, you know, Trump made them all deranged and they became like partisan as opposed to like just liberal, but trying to be objective. And then I think the second thing is, you know, you see all these woke scandals of the New York Times, and I mean, they're so consumed by these internal HR dramas that they've lost their ability to perform their function of being journalists.
Well, now they're constantly writing about themselves.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing.
Well-
There's like another article that came out right now about the New York Times, and I can't remember who, but one of these media reporters.
Ben Smith.
Was it
right?
Ben who was
I think-
like the New York Times has become like a reality show where they're just writing articles about their own staff members now? But people are clicking it. That's why they're doing it.
Well, I remember a few years ago hearing about their investigative unit just being totally gutted by new acquisitions to the company. And that makes absolutely sense, because if you don't have the budget to investigate stories or look into stories or research stories, well, you just have to make them up, just like they did in this instance. And I think it's very fair to say that this, I mean, you could say evil, you could say just total ignorance, you could just say total stupidity. Whether it is or isn't, it's still absolutely wrong and bad, and it needs to be called out as much as it can, so people realize that the New York Times is not the newspaper of record. It's the newspaper of whatever special interest or bozo behind it.
No. It's the lowest common denominator of subscribers. So they probably look at their subscriber base, the people who are paying, you know, digitally, and they're like, which one's gonna, you know, attract more people, or which one will be interesting to most of the people who watch, or, you know, who read our stuff. And so, you know, I want to make sure that we don't become like the New York Times, we here at Timcast IR, which is why we're very seriously looking into setting up a TV commercial for Our Pillow. We're gonna make sure that we use our resources for important things.
That's right.
Like a burlap sack full of packing peanuts that we advertise on primetime cable.
Yes.
Just as sort of like a culture jam, you know, or whatever. But I'm kidding, actually. We are working towards hiring reporters. And the idea would be the New York Times is going backwards. That's the way I view it. They're supposed to be using, you know, all this stuff they report on, the funding they get from subscribers should go towards journalism that people probably don't want to hear or might not care about. Instead, what they're doing is they're getting rid of the journalism that people probably don't care about but still needs to be reported, and replacing it with internal drama and conflict. What I want to do here is that we're all sitting here complaining about the New York Times. We don't even do hardcore investigative journalism. So it's like easy for us to criticize. Well, we're going in the right direction in that from a commentary podcast show, we're going to use funding towards actual journalism. And that's kind of the idea. I think they're doing the opposite. But look, I'll give them some respect in that they do journalism. Although I'm pretty concerned about whether I can trust it at this point. And I think, you know, what we want to do is particularly different. We'll have a brand that literally only does journalism. So we'll create a website dedicated specifically to just reporting stuff. And then we can keep the commentary off of that. Otherwise, I don't know, man. I think it's demoralizing.
Yeah.
It is. There is something. It's just like you rely on there being some institutions that remain nonpartisan. I think it's part of a bigger theme. Think about like the ACLU, for example. Everybody was great with the ACLU when they were just always fight free speech cases. You knew that it didn't matter if it was some communist or some terrible white nationalist, whatever it was. If they were having their free speech rights violated, the ACLU would go in and defend them because they were like, the principle matters more. It's about the right. Now they don't do that. Now they turn down far right clients.
Yep.
Because they're uncomfortable with it.
Well, now they're talking about gender on Twitter.
Right. And I mean, I remember I went to an ACLU event, you know, they were like celebrating their anniversary. They didn't even have a free speech. Like they didn't even talk about their free speech work. They're just embarrassed by it now.
Well, they made a lot of money. They made a lot of money opposing Donald Trump. And this is why I've never been a big fan of most nonprofits, because they're corporations. They care about their bottom line. They have customers. Mm-hmm. The customers, I'll tell you this. I think nonprofits are actually substantially more dangerous than for-profits in not every single one, obviously, but there are good for-profits that do the right thing, that are maybe sustainable and try to avoid polluting. And there are some good nonprofits that tend to be very small and they actually want to help people. But here's what I found with most nonprofits. They're still just corporations. The customer is an individual who wants their hopes and dreams fulfilled, or at least wants to feel like they're doing something. Nonprofits make money by convincing you that you don't have to do anything. You don't got to change your life. You don't have to recycle. You don't have to go and fight for the rights of free speech. Just give me $20 and I'll do it for you. And then they don't. They don't. But they want to make sure that their customers think they're getting a product. That's the crazy thing with a for profit. Like if we're selling pillows, like we actually have one, it's a burlap sack full of packing peanuts. I actually have to give you a sack full of packing peanuts. Otherwise, you're like, yo, where's my product? Not the nonprofits, not ACLU, and especially not the New York Times. This is the crazy thing about the news industry. If you call a plumber because your toilet breaks, right? Plumber comes in, fixes your toilet. You walk over, you flush it. It works. You say, okay, my toilet works. Here's your money. One day you call the plumber, your toilet doesn't work. He says, I fixed your toilet. Take my word for it. You flush it, nothing happens. You say, bro, I'm not paying you. How do you know the New York Times or any other news organization is doing their job? How can you tell the article is exactly what you asked for in terms of a product, legitimate information? You can't check it.
I mean, you can only guess. And I mean, you can infer from the fact that when they actually report something that's in your area of expertise, it's wrong.
Right.
Right.
The
Like
Gell-Mann amnesia effect.
The Gell-Mann amnesia effect.
Yeah.
I mean, that keeps happening. You just see them report something. I remember doing this. I remember it was during the Flynn case, and I went to a hearing and, watched how Judge Sullivan handled the defendants and, came out of that hearing. And I was there, and then I watched all the news stations report it wrong. Like, it was just their description. I mean, it was true insofar as they weren't making explicit factual errors, but their entire description of it was super misleading.
That's how it is.
Yeah. During the last show we did, when we did Super Chat, someone asked us this question, like, how do we trust what we read? And I went off on a tangent, but one of the things I said, if it's an anonymous source, there's a lot of reason to be skeptical. Another thing you really have to ask yourself when you're reading the news, whether it's even from independent or mainstream media, is who benefits? Who benefits from this information? And ask yourself with this this New York Times story. It's a lot of independent critical thinkers use that term, Q bono, especially when going through our modern news lexicon. But with that New York Times story, Q bono, who benefits from that psychological, emotional damage that was kind of sent out there to the general public? Who benefits from the story being perpetrated that these ravaged savages beat someone over the head and bashed their head in until their skull exploded with a fire extinguisher?
Well,
who benefits off of that?
The cabal.
Yeah.
Well, no. I don't know who the cabal is, but Time Magazine said that there was a cabal, their words, not mine, of wealthy elites who were conspiring. Again, Time Magazine said that, not me.
To fortify the election?
Well, to ensure the proper outcome.
Of course,
right.
yes.
And so who benefits? Well, the people who are trying to impeach Donald Trump. I would normally just say the Democrats, but apparently Time Magazine says there's a cabal. So I guess it's canon now. For a long time, people have referred to the cabal in a sort of conspiratorial way. And people have been like, oh, come on, there's no cabal. Well, Time Magazine, an official certified NewsGuard source. You can put it in Wikipedia now, the cabal, and then put a little citation to the Time Magazine article. It exists. I'm half kidding, by the way. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.